I knew I was in trouble the second I opened my door and saw that smug little clipboard tucked under her arm. Lorraine Vexley was standing dead center on my front porch. Her lips pursed so tight they looked like a paper cut. She didn't knock. She never knocked. She just stood there like she owned the whole block. "Mr. Lyle Zanders," she said in that irritatingly chipper tone that always meant she was about to threaten me with a fine, "Your lawn is precisely 1.5 inches too long and the paint on your window trim is, quote, visibly dull. That violates Section B14 of the HOA covenant." I stared at her. I had just come back from a 12-hour hospital shift. I'm an ER nurse, not a landscaper. I wiped a bit of dried blood off my forearm with my sleeve and leaned against the doorframe. "Lorraine," I said, "I cut the lawn 3 days ago." "Well, that may be," but she started to say, flipping through her clipboard. I cut her off. "Are you seriously stalking my grass height?" She blinked like she was offended. "We maintain high standards in this community, Mr. Zanders. The HOA has the right to enforce." Yeah, I muttered and closed the door in her face. That was the beginning of it. Lorraine had just been elected president of the Stone Ridge Estates HOA 2 months earlier, and she was already acting like a dictator with a badge. She didn't even live on my street, her house was 2 blocks over, but ever since she'd gotten the title, she'd been patrolling like a mall cop on a power trip. I tried to keep my head down. I paid my dues. I trimmed the hedges. But it didn't matter. Lorraine had decided I was a problem, and that made me her personal project. Then came the basement flood. It happened on a Sunday morning. I had just sat down with a cup of coffee when I heard a weird gurgling from the basement. I rushed down the stairs and stepped into a half-inch of ice-cold water. The sump pump was dead, the floor drain was backing up, and water was pouring in like someone had cracked open a fire hydrant. I waded through the mess, heart pounding. The breaker wasn't tripped. The sump pump was fine, brand new, in fact. Something was blocking the drainage line. I called in a plumber, then a second one when the first guy gave up. The second plumber, a retired guy named Rick, found it. He came up with a chunk of concrete in his hand, his face pale. "Someone stuffed this down the main drainage outlet," he said. "It didn't get here by accident." I stared at the chunk. "You're saying someone did this on purpose?" He nodded. "Definitely. And I found more pieces. Someone jammed the whole pipe. That's why the water backed into your basement." I didn't want to believe it at first. Who would do something like that? Then I remembered Lorraine. 2 weeks earlier, she'd been ranting at the HOA meeting about how people were ruining the aesthetic with their backyard sheds and basement renovations. I had just finished redoing my basement into a home gym and office. I hadn't pulled a permit because I didn't need one. But Lorraine had made it very clear she didn't approve. I didn't accuse her right away. Instead, I installed 2 new security cameras. One by my front door. One by the side gate near the drainage line. 3 nights later, I caught her. The footage was crystal clear. Lorraine, in her pink tracksuit, sneaking around the side of my house with a bucket. She crouched by the drainage outlet and spent 15 minutes stuffing it with chunks of broken concrete and dirt. She even looked up at one point, her face right in the camera. I stared at the footage in disbelief. She had actually done it. I didn't go to the HOA. I went straight to my lawyer. His name was Marcus, and he was a pit bull in a suit. He took one look at the footage and said, "She's toast." I filed a civil suit for damages over $35,000 in repairs, cleanup, and lost property. But Marcus didn't stop there. He also called the police, because what Lorraine did wasn't just petty, it was criminal. 2 days later, I came home to flashing blue lights and Lorraine being led away in handcuffs. She shrieked like a banshee, yelling about how she was protecting the neighborhood and enforcing standards. The cops didn't care. They had the footage. They had the bucket, the gloves, even the same pink tracksuit she wore in the video. Word spread fast. The neighborhood group chat exploded. People were coming out of their houses, whispering and pointing. Lorraine's husband, a quiet guy named Don, just stood on their lawn staring at the ground like he wanted to disappear. I thought it would end there, but the HOA had other ideas. 3 days after her arrest, I got a letter. "Dear Mr. Zanders," it read, "due to your recent behavior and pending litigation against a member of the HOA board, You are hereby fined for non-cooperation and creating a hostile environment. You owe $2,500 payable within 30 days. I laughed out loud. They were trying to fine me for suing their president for a crime she committed. I didn't laugh for long, though. That letter meant war. I started digging. I pulled public records, HOA meeting minutes, financial statements. I found things they didn't want anyone knowing. Like how Lorraine had been reimbursing herself for community improvement expenses that didn't exist. Or how she approved contracts to companies Don's cousin owned at double the usual rate. I started printing everything. I made a binder. Then I made copies of the binder. I passed those out to my neighbors. One night, I held a neighborhood coffee in my garage. Over 20 people showed up. I laid out the receipts, the videos, the fake reimbursements. I showed them the fine letter. I showed them the footage of Lorraine flooding my basement. People were angry. Not just at her, but at the whole HOA board that let her get away with it. That's when I proposed the vote. HOA bylaws allowed for a special election if enough homeowners signed a petition. I needed 25 signatures. I got 47. In one weekend. The board tried to stall it. Said the signatures were incomplete and improperly formatted. So I brought in Marcus again. He sent a legal notice that made their heads spin. The vote was happening. And I wasn't just going to vote Lorraine out. I was going to run. The special election was scheduled for the second Saturday of the month, and from the moment the date was posted on the community bulletin board, I noticed a shift in the way people walked their dogs or waved from their mailboxes. There were more lingering glances, more whispered conversations at the sidewalk corners. I wasn't just the guy who caught Lorraine on camera, I was the one who'd cracked open something deeper. People had started dropping by uninvited, not to complain, but to share their own stories. Not one of them wanted to go on record, but it was clear, Lorraine had left bruises all over Stone Ridge. I didn't campaign the way you'd expect. No yard signs, no flyers stuck under windshield wipers. I did something worse. I listened. I let people talk. I knocked on doors and asked the same question every time, what would you change if you had a say? Some of the answers were small. One woman wanted to hang wind chimes again without being told they were auditory litter. An older couple wanted to repaint their shutters the same color they'd been for 30 years but had been denied because the approved shade list had been changed without notice. A guy 2 streets over told me he'd planted native grasses to reduce water usage and got fined for non-uniform landscaping. He'd paid it because he didn't want trouble. But now he didn't look afraid anymore. I kept notes. Every house I visited, every frustration I wrote down. I built a platform out of resentment, not promises. By the time the election day came, I wasn't just running, I was carrying 100 voices on my back. The HOA board, desperate to retain control, tried their best to stack the vote. They sent out a last-minute mailer claiming I had a pattern of confrontation and a disregard for community harmony. They printed it on glossy paper and quoted bylaws like scripture. I kept mine simple. A single sheet, hand-delivered, that read, I believe in fair rules, not secret punishments. Let's fix this together. The vote was held in the community clubhouse. I showed up 15 minutes early and was stunned by the line already forming. People had brought folding chairs, bottled water, even snacks like they were settling in for a movie. The energy buzzed, not angry, just restless. The kind that comes when a lid's been kept on too long. Lorraine wasn't there. Word was she hadn't come back home since the arrest. Her house sat quiet, the porch light on day and night like a forgotten stage set. No one missed her. I won by a landslide. Out of 244 eligible voters, 186 showed up. 178 voted for me. The rest scattered among write-ins, including someone who voted for their golden retriever. I didn't laugh at that. I understood the sentiment. The next board meeting was scheduled for the following Monday, and I walked into that room not as a petitioner, not as a victim, but as the new president. The board members didn't know how to look at me. Glenn, the treasurer, kept checking his phone like he wished he could disappear through it. Melody, who handled violations, gave me a brittle smile that didn't reach her eyes. I didn't waste time. The first thing I did was motion for a full audit of all expenditures from the last 18 months. The second was to suspend all fines issued during Lorraine's tenure pending independent review. The third was to open the floor for resident questions, something that hadn't been allowed in over a year. When I asked who had concerns, nearly every hand in the room went up. That meeting went on for 3 hours. We heard about unauthorized surveillance, harassment over paint colors, even one guy who'd been told to remove a birdhouse because it invited pest species. Glenn tried to shut it down halfway through, citing time constraints. I overruled him. The people had waited long enough. Afterward, someone slid a manila envelope across the table to me. Inside were emails. Dozens of them. Between Lorraine and various contractors, some legitimate, some barely registered businesses. They detailed inflated costs, retroactive approvals, and reimbursements for consultation dinners at upscale restaurants miles outside our district. They hadn't even tried to hide the grift. They just assumed no one would bother looking. I turned the envelope over and saw a sticky note stuck to the back. No name, just 2 words, keep going. I didn't sleep much that night. Not from anxiety, but from momentum. I wasn't just fixing my basement anymore, I was gutting rot from the foundation of the whole neighborhood. The civil case against Lorraine was moving forward. My lawyer, Marcus, had filed for full restitution of damages, plus punitive costs. Lorraine's attorney tried to offer a settlement half the damages. No admission of guilt. Marcus barely looked up from his sandwich before saying no. We went to court a week later. Lorraine showed up looking hollowed out, her hair pulled back tight and her blazer a size too large. She didn't look at me. Her lawyer did most of the talking, trying to spin the incident as a misunderstood maintenance act. The judge didn't buy it. Not after seeing the footage, the plumber's report, and the chemical analysis of the concrete used to block the drain. It matched a broken planter from Lorraine's own yard. She was ordered to pay the full cost of repairs, plus an additional $15,000 in punitive damages. The look on her face when the judge read the order was the first honest expression I'd seen from her, shock, followed by something close to fear. That night, I got a knock on my door. It was Don, Lorraine's husband. He looked older than I remembered, like the past few weeks had drained whatever color he had left. I didn't know, he said, eyes fixed on the porch boards. About what she was doing. I swear to you, I didn't say anything. She thought she was fixing things, he went on. She got obsessed. Said the neighborhood was slipping. That she had to hold the line. She held the line with a bucket of concrete, I said. He nodded slowly. I'm selling the house. I didn't try to stop him. He shook my hand once, weakly, then walked off into the night. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. With Lorraine gone and the board reshuffled, we started making real changes. The violation process was rewritten with an appeals clause. Fines had to be reviewed by at least 3 board members before being issued. We opened monthly forums where residents could speak freely. And perhaps most importantly, we began returning money. Not all the funds Lorraine had misused could be recovered, but we clawed back enough through legal channels to refund a portion of every fine she had handed out. Some people cried when they got their checks. Others just muttered thanks and walked away, clutching them like overdue apologies. I didn't do it alone. I never could have. But I had done what mattered. Exposed a bully, pulled the curtain, and handed the mic to the people who'd been silenced. One morning, a kid on a skateboard rolled past my driveway and gave me a thumbs up. No words, just that. I stood there with a cup of coffee, watching him vanish down the street, and smiled not because I'd won, but because I'd made the kind of noise that couldn't be ignored. And Stone Ridge was finally listening. The first real test of our newly reformed HOA came faster than I expected. Less than 2 weeks after the board overhaul and the audit results were made public, I got a call from a man named Carlos Benitez. He lived on the far end of the neighborhood in one of the older cul-de-sacs built before Stone Ridge Estates had expanded. His voice over the phone was calm but tight, the kind of tone people used when they were trying to keep their anger from boiling over. I heard what you did with the board, he said. I've got something you should see. I met him that evening in his garage. He had a folding table set up with stacks of envelopes, old HOA notices, and a battered laptop that looked like it had survived a hurricane. Carlos had been quietly documenting what he called a pattern, and I could tell by the way he organized everything that he wasn't exaggerating. He flipped open the laptop and showed me a spreadsheet. Each row had a name, a date, a violation, and a total amount paid. Every single household in his cul-de-sac had been fined at least once in the last year, some multiple times, for things as arbitrary as visible trash bins or non-conforming awning patterns. The numbers didn't add up. The same violation issued to two different homeowners had wildly different fine amounts. Some paid $50. Others paid $300. And worse, none of them had ever received a breakdown of how the fines were calculated. Carlos leaned over the table and tapped one of the rows. That's me. I got hit for having a non-regulation trellis. They told me it was too tall. I asked for the measurement standards. They said it was proprietary. I raised an eyebrow. Proprietary landscaping standards? He nodded. I measured it myself. It wasn't even 6 feet. But I paid it. We all did. Because Lorraine made it impossible not to. I scanned through more of the data. There was something off about the dates. The fines were always clustered, dozens issued within a few days, followed by silence. I asked Carlos if he still had the envelopes they came in. He pulled a stack from a shoebox. Most of them had been mailed from a local print shop, not the HOA office. That was illegal. Fines couldn't be outsourced to third-party mailers without homeowner approval. It also explained why the board couldn't produce half the documentation during the audit. Carlos looked at me, half hopeful, half exhausted. Can you do something about this? I already am, I said. I took the data to Melody, one of the remaining board members. She was the only one who hadn't fought me during the transition, and I was starting to think she'd been coerced more than complicit. When I showed her the spreadsheet, she paled. I didn't sign off on these, she said. Lorraine handled the fine approvals herself for that zone. You guys weren't supposed to have zones. I know, but she called it streamlining. Said it cut down on redundancy. I didn't need to say anything. Melody sat back in her chair, staring at her hands. We'll nullify the fines, she said, and I'll draft a resolution preventing any single board member from issuing them going forward. I nodded. And we're refunding them. Melody hesitated, then gave a slow nod. The next board meeting was packed. Word had spread about Carlos's spreadsheet, and more residents from the outer streets had come forward with their own stories. We had to move chairs into the hallway to accommodate the crowd. One man, a retired firefighter named Len, stood up and held a photograph in the air. It showed his fence perfectly intact, freshly painted, and a violation form stapled to it. The reason? Disruptive visual pattern. I built this fence with my own hands, he said. Lorraine fined me $200 because the slats were too vertical. What kind of nonsense is that? The room erupted into murmurs and low laughter. Len tapped the photo against his palm. I paid it because I didn't want to argue. But now I want it back. And that's what we did. Over the next month, we issued full refunds to every homeowner fined under Lorraine's streamlined system. The total came to just under $70,000. We had to freeze several improvement projects to cover it, but no one complained. Felt like a cleansing. Meanwhile, Lorraine had gone quiet. Her house was still up for sale, but no one touched it. Not because of the price it was listed low, but because the whole neighborhood had seen what she was capable of. The place felt tainted, like a monument to unchecked power. Then came the letter. It arrived at my house in a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in a serif font. The message was short. You've made powerful enemies. Be careful where you dig next. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't tell the board. I told Marcus. He took the letter, photographed it, and handed it back. This is intimidation, he said. It's weak, but it's also illegal. I wasn't worried. I'd faced worse in the ER. But it confirmed something I'd suspected. Lorraine hadn't acted alone. Some of the contracts she'd approved were too convenient, too padded with backdoor clauses. And I remembered something curious from the audit. One landscaping company had been paid 9 times in 1 month for emergency compliance jobs. That same company had never responded to my calls for quotes. I paid them a visit. The office was tucked behind a gas station on the edge of town. The receptionist, a bored-looking kid in a hoodie, told me the owner was out. I left a note with my number and a request for a meeting. He didn't call, but someone else did. A week later, I got a voicemail from a man named Harold Dorsey. He claimed to be a former employee of the company in question. His message was clipped, like he was reading from a script. I worked for Green Ridge Services for 6 months. I saw the invoices. Most of the jobs billed to Stone Ridge never happened. If you want proof, meet me at the old train depot off Route 7. Midnight. Don't bring anyone. It sounded like a bad spy movie. But I went. The depot was barely standing, just a few rusted beams and a cracked foundation. I parked a block away and walked in with a flashlight. Harold was already there, sitting on a milk crate, smoking a hand-rolled cigarette. "You're the guy who took down Vexley," he said. I didn't respond. "She wasn't the ringleader," he said. "Just the loudest." The real push came from the vendors. Kickbacks, inflated bids, fake jobs. She just signed off on them and took her cut. Harold pulled a flash drive from his pocket and tossed it to me. "That's everything. Invoices, emails, even a video of one of the emergency tree removals. Spoiler, no tree ever existed." I didn't ask why he was helping. I figured he had his reasons. I took the drive straight to Marcus. He was already drafting a report to the county inspector's office. With this, he said, we could trigger a full investigation, possibly even criminal charges. The next morning, Melody called me. Her voice was tight. Someone broke into the HOA office. They didn't steal money. They took files. Hard copies of contractor approvals, meeting notes from the previous board, and one of the backup drives. But they missed something. I had a duplicate set of files in my garage, copies Carlos and I had made during the audit, just in case. That night, I installed a second set of locks on my doors and wired the exterior lights to motion sensors. I wasn't scared. I was preparing. We were close to something bigger. And someone didn't want it found. The county inspector's office moved faster than I thought they would. 2 days after Marcus submitted the flash drive, they dispatched 2 investigators to Stone Ridge Estates. I watched from my driveway as they walked up the path to the HOA office, briefcases in hand, expressions unreadable. Melody stood at the door to let them in, her fingers curled tightly around a clipboard. She didn't look at me when I passed, but she gave the smallest nod, like she knew this was the point of no return. I kept my distance. I wasn't trying to play hero anymore. I had made my move. Now it was time to let the pieces fall where they may. But then the calls started. The first came from a man named Alan Griggs. He was a former HOA president from another neighborhood across town. Said he'd heard about the investigation through mutual contacts and wanted to talk. I met him at a diner off the freeway, the kind of place where the booths were cracked and the coffee tasted like burnt rubber. Alan was in his 60s, wore suspenders, and had the kind of voice that sounded like it had lived through too many board meetings. "She did the same thing in Brookview Point," he said as he stirred a sugar packet into his tea. "We didn't have the proof to file charges, but she bled us slowly. Fines, fake landscaping bids, consultations with vendors that never existed." I set down my fork. "You're telling me Lorraine ran this scheme before?" He nodded, the spoon clinking gently against the side of the cup. "Same playbook, different names. She left before we could pin anything down. Took a job with a property management firm that folded within a year. Then she turns up here, and the whole cycle starts again." I leaned back and studied him. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" "Didn't have anything concrete," he said. "But when I heard she got arrested for flooding a homeowner's basement, I figured someone finally got through her armor." He handed me a worn folder. Inside were copies of old HOA newsletters, financial records, and a few photos of Lorraine at ribbon-cutting ceremonies, always standing just a little too close to whoever signed the checks. I didn't need more evidence. But this wasn't about quantity anymore. This was about patterns. What Lorraine had done to my basement wasn't an isolated meltdown, it had been a calculated move. A tactic. And I wasn't the first target. The irony was, the more I tried to step away from it, the more it pulled me back in. That night, I got a voicemail from Melody. Her voice was tense, clipped. "They've started seizing records. Subpoenas went out this morning. Contractors, former board members, even Lorraine's husband." I didn't call back. I knew she was just keeping me in the loop. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was one more layer we hadn't peeled back yet. The final piece came from someone I never expected. A teenager. His name was Aiden, and he lived 2 doors down from Lorraine's old place. I saw him walking by one afternoon, earbuds in, hoodie pulled tight, and he stopped when he saw me. Didn't say anything at first, just hovered near the edge of my driveway like he was debating whether to speak. "You're the guy who nailed her, right?" he finally asked. I nodded. "I have something," he said. "I wasn't gonna say anything, but I think it matters." He pulled out his phone and showed me a video. It was grainy, filmed from his bedroom window at night. It showed Lorraine in her backyard, pacing in circles and talking loudly on her phone. The audio was muffled, but one line was crystal clear. "I don't care what the bylaws say if they don't like it. I'll make them wish they never moved here." It wasn't a confession, but it was a window into her mindset. And that mindset had driven her to sabotage, deception, and outright fraud. "I recorded it last month," Aiden said. "She was out there almost every night, talking to someone. I think she was scared." He handed me the video file. "Use it if it helps. Just don't say it came from me." I promised I wouldn't. The next morning, Marcus added the clip to the growing file he was preparing for civil court. The criminal case against Lorraine was already underway, but the civil suit was where the real accountability would play out. And it did. The courtroom wasn't flashy. Just 4 walls, a tired judge, and a row of chairs that creaked every time someone shifted their weight. Lorraine showed up in a charcoal suit, her face drawn and pale. Her attorney tried to argue diminished responsibility, claimed she was under extreme mental strain from managing the community. But the evidence was overwhelming. The video footage, the invoices, the forged signatures on contractor approvals, the sabotage of my drainage system. When Marcus played the clip of Lorraine in her backyard ranting about the bylaws, her attorney didn't even object. He just sat there, slumped, as if he knew the tide had already turned. The judge ruled in our favor. Lorraine was ordered to pay full damages for the basement flood, cover the cost of the audit, and return all funds improperly funneled through fake vendor contracts. Altogether, it came to just over $81,000. She didn't react, just stared at the floor, hands clenched in her lap. Outside the courthouse, the air felt lighter, like something had been lifted off the neighborhood's shoulders. I didn't celebrate. I went home, changed into jeans and an old t-shirt, and started cleaning out my garage. I found the backup files, the printouts, and the binder that had started it all. I boxed them up, labeled them Stone Ridge Reform, and slid them onto a shelf. Melody stopped by later that evening. She stood in the middle of my driveway, hands in her coat pockets, eyes scanning the street. "We're rebuilding," she said without preamble. "The new board is coming together. We're rewriting the charter next month. You should be there." "I'll be there," I said, "but only as a resident." She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded and walked off without another word. By the following week, the community had started to shift in ways that felt subtle but significant. People were talking more, sharing tips on lawn care instead of complaints. The HOA office door stayed open during business hours. A new suggestion box sat on the front desk, clear plastic, no lock, and was already half full. Carlos sent me a message thanking me. Said the folks in his cul-de-sac were planning a block party for the first time in years. He invited me to stop by. I told him I'd bring brownies. Even Don, Lorraine's husband, came by one afternoon. He didn't apologize. He didn't have to. He just handed me a sealed manila envelope and said it had been sitting in their attic, unopened. Inside were copies of Lorraine's personal notes, handwritten plans, itemized lists of homeowners she considered non-compliant, and a rough outline for a compliance strike team she had never gotten the chance to implement. It was chilling, but it was over. Stone Ridge had been on the edge of something rotten. We'd peeled it back, exposed the roots, and cut them out. Not because I wanted to, because I had to. And now, for the first time in a long time, the neighborhood was quiet in the way it should be. No threats, no fines, no pink tracksuits lurking near drain pipes. Just the sound of sprinklers ticking in the distance, wind chimes on a porch that no one had dared hang for months, and a kid on a skateboard rolling past without looking over his shoulder. We had taken back our homes, and they weren't giving them up again.